Welcome to the Live Your Possible podcast, the show about sparking and discovering endless possibilities where we work, live, and play. A safe place where we can help you peel back the cover to what may be blocking you from being your most authentic and happiest self.
Don't miss out on our dynamic guest today, Aaron Craig Mitchell, to examine the world through different perspectives and unlock the creativity we all possess at the intersection of playful and possible. I first met Aaron at Mass Mutual, where we both worked and knew back then he was on a path to delivering with higher meaning. We talk about Aaron's journey filled with failures and how he cultivated resiliency to keep him moving forward, resulting in far-reaching impacts. He is currently an LA-based entrepreneur, advisor, coach, and changemaker, focused on helping individuals and companies realize their potential by building resilience, cultural competence, and community coalition building. His unique skill is bringing people together and unlocking the unique potential that resides within, both with individuals and groups. Enjoy the show. Welcome, Aaron Craig Mitchell, to the Live Your Possible podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Darrin.
Hey, it's good to see you again. It's been about 7 years, I think, since we worked together.
It has been, that's a long time. Time has flown by fast.
And I think a lot has happened since then too. And I just remember when we first met, how impressed I was when we were connecting and chatting about the world. You were in the talent space, and how we were trying to change the way of thinking and how we brought the best talent into the organization. And I got to tell you, I'm excited that you're here, and I'd love to just kind of start. What are you passionate about these days? And let's just start to jump into your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, we met back at Mass Mutual. Was that 2017?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
so it's been a good amount of time, but these days, I left HR as a profession September 2022. So I broke off and I started working as an entrepreneur. And so today I'm a strategic advisor, executive coach, facilitator, and a storyteller. I do some public speaking, podcast, things of that nature. And it's all centered around, like, my passion these days is really helping people and organizations redefine what prosperity means. And when I say that, what I really hope to be doing and what I've been doing in a lot of the spaces is, one, I think when we talk about being happy, we were talking about that just a moment ago. I think a lot of times people are focused on attaining things, whether that be title, a certain amount of money, et cetera, and so forth, in order to achieve, like, if I could just get that thing, then I'll be happy, then I'll be prosperous. And a lot of the work that I'm doing at the individual level, at the organizational level, is really saying, what is our real objective? What is our real purpose? How do we maybe change the goalpost so that we can actually achieve this thing, versus we have to grow 20% as a metric. Arbitrary, it doesn't mean anything, it doesn't add any value to society, but we have to do that thing, versus why don't we expand how we think about where we spend our money in order to create a healthier consumer group? Or how do we think about my own personal, journey? And I talk about that real quick. I was head of HR for Netflix Animation Studio up until September 2022. And after being given a choice to either take a smaller role or leave the organization, I kind of blew up my life, right? I was like, you know what? I don't think I'm going to do HR anymore. I think I'm going to start over from scratch. And a lot of that for me was redefining my own personal prosperity. Like, what is it that I'm trying to get out? And at the time, I needed to be able to spend more time with my wife and my kids. I needed to be more present. I needed to be more available, but I also needed to be focused on my own personal physical and mental health. I had chronic back issues that I wasn't dealing with, because I'm like, I'm too busy to do what I need to do. So let me just keep going, and eventually the pain will go away, because that's what pain does, right? So I had to change certain aspects of my lifestyle, and I had to take a pretty significant pay cut in order to do so, which I would not have been able to do if the pay, if the title, if the achievement of those things was the factor of the signal of prosperity. So I went back to the drawing board with my wife and had to map out, like, what are all the things that we're trying to accomplish? How much time do we want to see each other? Like, is me being on the road 60, 70% of the time worth it if what I'm supposed to be doing is spending time with my family? And just to add a little context to why this was such a critical moment is my daughter had just a couple months before maybe 6 months before I left Netflix, had just been diagnosed with autism, which meant that we were going to be in therapy 5 days a week for 2 hours. And doing that, and then asking my wife, well, that's your responsibility, is kind of ridiculous, because if I'm on the road, it means she's in therapy every day. And I don't know if you've dealt with a child on the spectrum, but nothing makes sense. Nothing makes sense. So to put that on her would have been inappropriate. My wife had just lost her brother, her best friend. He died suddenly March of 2022. And the grief and depression that comes along with that, you know, she was essentially out of commission for an entire year because grief doesn't have a timeline. My father had had a heart attack. My mom was dealing with all of the things with heart attack. He had just beat cancer. And so all of this was happening all at the same time. And it's like, I could do what I've been doing because I've always been able to handle a lot, or I could listen to my body and this chronic back pain. I could listen to the circumstances around me and do something really, really different. And I've been doing that now for the last year and a half. And again, like, it has given me so much perspective on helping others sort of craft and find that purpose for themselves, because it doesn't have to be the same as mine, but it should be something that is evident in everything that you're doing. Otherwise, you're doing what I was doing. You're lying to yourself. You're engaging in self-imposed gaslighting. And we can't be our best versions if that's the lives that we live.
And how did you remain so resilient through those times and help out your wife and the family? You know, there's definitely a lot of, you know, a lot of sadness, a lot of, you know, a lot of circumstances that you had to work through. And I mean, that would settle most folks back for a long time. And you're right about grief, and grief has no timeline, and it will always be with us to a degree. And
Yeah.
you know, how did you handle that? How did you and the family go through that? You know, what was your resilience like?
So this is going to sound weird, but I was fortunate enough to have a very troubling upbringing. And what I mean by that is I was born and raised in New Haven, Connecticut, and I grew up in the part of New Haven that, you know, anybody who's from the Northeast, during the 90s, New Haven was not a place that you went unless you had to go. I remember there was a New York Times article in May of 1991 titled "Armed Youth," something like "Armed Youth Turned New Haven into a Battleground." And at this point in New Haven's history, New Haven was on the top 10 most dangerous cities on the FBI's lists of cities. And most people don't know this because New Haven's this really small town. It's Yale University, but my front yard, my experience was that of just violence and chaos sort of all around us. And I had a really good family, like my mom and dad, loving parents who did everything they did to sort of cultivate creativity and safety in the spaces where they could. But the soundtrack outside was, I heard gunshots every night, right? We had drive-by shootings. I think I was 10 years old when I was walking home from school and I saw somebody get shot in the head. And these are things that became sort of my normalized existence. So I developed resilience because my parents, knowing they couldn't control the surroundings, cultivated that resilience. Whenever something bad or tragic happened, we talked about it so that we understood it. I learned how to communicate my feelings really, really early on. And being able to communicate those feelings and being able to talk about them and have my parents say that this is not normal, this is not good, but we must survive this, we must go forward regardless, right? Like there was always this idea that no matter what, we go forward. And both my parents are not college educated. My father dropped out of high school and went back and got his GED, was a mechanic. My mom decorated cakes, but both my parents are extremely intelligent, not based on their education, but just based on their common sense and street smarts. And so they knew, based on their own experiences growing up, what needed what kind of emotional support we needed in order to survive this thing. And so that was the early sort of cultivation. I also went to a performing arts high school, and I recently read this book called Your Brain on Art. I highly recommend it to anybody, specifically anybody who's got any connection to the arts. But it talks about how much the creative pursuits are important for mental health. Essentially, all creative pursuits, whether they be music, art, acting, storytelling, poetry, spoken word, even cooking, like all of these things allow us to access a part of our humanity that is I'd say it is natural to all of us, right? You can be an artist without being a professional or commercial artist, because all art is art. And so for me, going to a performing arts high school, I got to see art in everything. Wow. Because no matter what the class was, they somehow incorporated some aspect of visual or performing arts. So I remember doing like papers in English where we would have to do something like, oh, well, you have to interpret this story and create a book cover. It wasn't only the art students that had to do this, everybody had to do this, or you had to do something performance-wise. So I had this really interesting multidisciplinary experience with creativity that allowed me to infuse creativity into everything. And I just thought that that's what everybody did. I didn't realize this was something that was special for performing arts. So that, the upbringing and having access to this sort of way, this way to cope, this way to express, created a mechanism that allowed me to continue to cultivate that resilience, right? I also failed a lot. Like, and when I say a lot, I failed at everything, Darrin. I failed at Little League Baseball. Like, I was good at T-ball, but when it came to actually hitting the ball, it was terrible. Like, I have this memory of like my dad trying to teach me how to catch. And there's all these kids around, and my dad is like frustrated because like what father doesn't want to play catch with his son, right? It's like the American thing to do. And my, is before I started wearing glasses, I could not figure out how people caught balls. I'm like, I don't get it, right? And so one day my dad has all the kids around, he throws a fastball, it goes into this cloud of kids, and I'm like, well, my dad knows I can't catch, so I put my hands down, and the ball comes out of the crowd and hits me straight in the mouth, right? And I'm like, my dad is mortified, he's feeling guilty and everything. And I get out of Little League, and because I was terrible, I was like the least valuable player. If they had LVPs, it would have been me on this team. And then like my mom convinces me, because my team ends up winning the championship. My mom convinces me, support your team, go to the award ceremony to support your team. I'm like, I don't think I should do that, Mom. She's like, you should absolutely do that, support the team. I get there and they all clown me. They're like, you didn't do anything. What are you doing here, dude? Like, you don't deserve to be here. Why? You just came from the trophy. Like, and even the coach is laughing at me.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, humiliated, destroyed. And I look at my mom like, why would you do this? And I think there was something that she understood, like, in order to be unbreakable, you have to break. And you might as well do it when the bones are still soft, because when the bones get harder when you're older, those breaks can kill you. And so it was literally like, when I tell you if there were trophies for losing, my trophy case would be impressive. And all of that, right? Like all those things coming together, I think, helped to really cultivate resilience early on. I never shied away from failure because I was so familiar with it. It's like, well, I'm gonna try. If I fail, I already know what that feels like. So, why not?
You kept trying.
Kept trying because, again, like I failed at everything, number one. Number two, I grew up in a family with really, really smart parents whose intelligence did not give them a leg up in their careers, but they kept going, right? Like there was never a day where my dad was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I quit life because it's not fair, right? My father, when I graduated from college, my father, because I had to fill out financial aid forms, was making like $30,000 a year. And he was the sole breadwinner, which You can't be the sole breadwinner on $30,000 a year. But my dad was, and I respected him, and I respect him, and I love him. And I never thought about that as some deficiency, because he just kept going. No matter what, he was going to keep going. My mom was going to keep going. So there was no version of quitting that seemed acceptable, because I didn't have that personal experience. So I think it started there, and that foundation is something I just sort of built on as I went on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I like how you talk about the cultivation of resilience and your mom's point about to be unbreakable, you got to break. And your willingness to share that. I always commend folks for being vulnerable, and I appreciate you sharing that. Hey, you failed and you kept going. And as you're going through that, yeah, I imagine you're seeing things, you're learning things, and when you talk about creativity, how's that carrying forward today in what you're doing?
Yep. In terms of the creativity, once I realized that I had access to this creativity, whether it be
Yeah.
through art or music, again, like I said, it was something that I just sort of infused in everything that I did. When I got to Temple University, for instance, I left New Haven, graduated from Performing Arts High School, went to Temple University. It's where I met my wife freshman year. So the story I like to tell is I didn't know it, but I landed my wife because I played the saxophone.
Nice.
I had no idea that that's what did it for her until maybe 6 years ago, when she was like, we were at a place and I was playing and I was serenading her. And I was like, I think I'm going to incorporate this into the show. She's like, I'm not showing up at every show. I was like, no. I'll just play. I'll just do it with, whoever's in the audience, nice woman who's sitting in the front. She's like, you will not. I'm like, why? She's like, do you understand how much of a tool the saxophone is? I'm like, no, you've never told me anything. She's like, that's why we started dating. I'm like,
Oh, wow.
you waited until we were together for 17 years to tell me that my superpower was the saxophone thing? But it was because it was, jazz is personal expression, and it allowed me to find a way to be my authentic self. And it worked, because my wife is the best decision and the best thing that happened to me in college. Based
That's
on my
amazing.
upbringing, like, I didn't know how to study. I didn't know what a syllabus was. Like I said, I grew up in the inner city of New Haven, Connecticut. And as much as the performing arts aspect of my education prepared me for so much, there's a lot of things I wasn't prepared for. And so I got to college and I was taking remedial classes because I didn't do well in math. And my wife, we met second semester freshman year, electrical engineer. She's like, you don't know how to do this kind of math? Like, my offering to her beyond just the music was, I'm actually a really good writer, and I'd write all her papers. I'm like, you help me with math, I'll write your papers.
Nice. Love it.
Deal.
Partnership.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
But beyond that, like, I started to discover that where I was deficient as a saxophone player, there was a lot of things that I learned about connecting with people, in terms of performance, right? So in terms of the creativity, I started to leverage that in how I told stories and how I connected with people. I ended up going the route of HR, which I was attracted to because of people. But the thing that attracted me to the people was not, oh, I like people. I don't dislike people, but it wasn't because, oh, I really like people, because I would have been a social worker if that was the case. It was more like, I appreciate connecting with people, learning about their stories, learning about their cultures, learning about what makes them tick. And there was something about improvisational music that created an access point to that for me, in terms of just, in order for jazz music to be, there has to be this sort of honest, authentic collaboration amongst individuals who, in those moments, everybody's valuable, everybody matters. Nobody is less important than the other. And I think embodying that in my interactions with people was a big part of the creativity that I've taken forward. And then fast forward, I actually wrote my essays to get into Harvard Business School. Half of the essays I wrote were about music, and were about the experiences that I got leading people, or working with people, or mentoring people in the context of music, not in the stuff that I did in the business world. And it's funny because, like, I was working in Bakersfield, California. Do you know anything about Bakersfield, California, dear?
No, I do not.
Neither do most people, right? Bakersfield, California is the country music capital of the West Coast.
Oh,
But beyond that, it's known for things like there's a movie, Running Man. Remember
yeah.
Arnold Schwarzenegger in Running Man?
Yes. Yep.
His character's title was the Butcher of Bakersfield.
Oh, okay.
So that's all I knew about Bakersfield before I got there. But ended up leveraging music to, one, make a lot of the initial connections I made. I leveraged music to get my first promotion, my leadership promotion, because when my boss is like, look, Aaron, I want to invest in you. I believe in you, but you just don't have any previous supervisory experience. I'm like, well, I was the musical director of a salsa band, and I've hired and fired and disciplined and blah, blah, blah. He's like, oh, actually, you check all the boxes. You're promoted, right? Get into HBS on a lot of that stuff. End up moving to Singapore after about a year after I left HBS, working with Citibank. And a big part of the reason that I got moved to Singapore, the responsibility was, hey, Aaron, we need you to go and fix recruitment in Asia. That was it. 1 year out of business school. And they're like, we need you to fix recruitment in Asia, either in Singapore and Hong Kong. Regionally, we don't know what you need to do. We don't know how you need to do it. And so, again, I approached that in the same way that I would have approached, hey, Aaron, we need you to put together a set for, this type of music at this particular venue. Like, I'm going to immerse myself into it, understand it, listen, get to know, meet people, build relationships, and collaborate, because anything and everything that is going to happen through collaboration and through leveraging and working with other people. And many of those skills are the skills that I learned as a musician. And I also played as a musician when I was in Singapore. I joined a R&B band. And so, like, I had my day life personality as the serious corporate head of strategy and planning for Asia Pacific recruitment. And then I was in this R&B band, and then I would also play at the jazz clubs and whatnot. So I was able to walk and move in these different spaces, which, again, when it comes to connecting with people, understanding stories, understanding Singapore beyond the glitz and the glamour, musicians are going to give you the real, right? Like, these are the people, especially in the context of Singapore, that didn't go to the good schools, that didn't, get the awards. They're like me. They're the ones that they did a lot of losing along the way, because in a society like Singapore that, promotes math and science, becoming a musician, specifically like an R&B or jazz musician, are not necessarily the aspirational goals. So it has always been and continues to be a big part of what I do, either directly participating in the arts or leveraging everything that I've learned about connecting with people as an artist to the workplace. And even the stuff that, the short amount of time that I spent at Mass Mutual, a lot of what I was trying to do in terms of driving change with culture comes from that very creative mindset. Like, let's take two very unrelated things, put them together, figure out where the intersection is, and in most cases, that is the definition of creativity.
Yeah, that's a unique skill. And it takes, like a lot of things, it takes intention, takes effort. I imagine you see things differently. You see that you have like maybe a more clarity to see what's possible than maybe others, just based on your level of creativity. What do you think about that?
I mean, I'm doing a workshop in a couple weeks, and one of the things they asked us to do is reach out to people you work with and ask for feedback. So I just got a bunch of feedback in, and I'd say that that's kind of the common thread, right? Like, people tell me you see things differently than a lot of people, and it's not so much like a lot of the things, and I'll talk about one of them. It's not so much that I'm thinking of something that is so unfathomable and I just pluck it from the sky and bring it. It's more like it's a real simple thing that nobody else was thinking about because they were over baking or over complicating. And it's like, well, why don't we do it this way and just flip that thing on the side? That's been the superpower that I've cultivated over time. I'd say it's only really been a benefit to me in the last couple of years. Like, at every point before Netflix, it was more of a hindrance than it was a a superpower, because people are like, can you stay in the box? Not, can you find a new box? And now it's like, now that's what I get called to do. But
Yeah.
up until I'd say 2020 with Netflix, nobody wanted that.
Yeah, people weren't ready for it, I'd say, because a lot of people I've seen, they can't see what's possible, or they just want to go get the results that we're trying to get rather than actually, build better results or maybe even bigger results or different results with different people and different perspectives, different ideas. Have you read the Medici Effect with Franz Johansson?
Absolutely.
So what you're
Yeah.
talking about resonates with me with that
Yeah.
book.
Yeah. I mean, when I read that book, I was like, me. Like I felt seen, right? Because
Yeah.
again, like if I'm a jazz saxophonist, my family owned a bakery, so I'm actually a baker and a cook, right? And I almost went to culinary school, which is I decided between culinary school and Temple University, and I chose Temple because it was a big city, not Providence, Rhode Island. That was my decision-making criteria. I have done martial arts for most of my life up until recently, because age, man, age.
Hey,
Stuff starts
those are
breaking
back
down
issues.
and
Yeah.
and not get yeah and not repairing, but I'm touching on that. And then like running HR for Netflix animation opened up a whole other area of my life. Like I mentioned, I went to a performing arts high school. I actually initially wanted to go for visual arts. I've always drawn. I was big into comic books, big into animation, but I wasn't a good enough artist. And my mom convinced them to accept me on music instead of art, which was like a big point of contention for me and my mom for like a good year and a half. Cause I'm like, I don't like music. I don't enjoy this. Why did you make me do this? I just want to do art. And she's like, you don't need to go to school for art to draw. And I'm like, but what's the point of going to an art school and not going for art? So there was that whole thing. But I learned very early on, just listen to your mom. And in fact, listen
So
to the
true.
women in your life, because they are almost always smarter and more informed than you. So just shut up and listen. And yeah, so that was bringing all of those things together. I always thought was a little bit more of a distraction until I read the Medici Effect, and I'm like, oh, there's something to this. Like in fact, we should probably try cultivating this in people, because all of this stuff is learnable.
Yes. Yeah, it's like taking the best of different things and coming together as you described earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Any of us could practice that. That's the beauty of your ability to kind of create and discover and explore. You look at two different things, two different products, two different
Mm-hmm.
companies, take the best of, or can you learn an idea from something that is totally indifferent to make it something that makes a product better or a solution
Yep.
better? I don't know if it, like something that you've done. Aaron, I'm curious to see if there's something that you've created or identified at the intersection of two things that we're talking about here.
Yeah, I'd say the one that I'm most proud of, and the one that's become a big part of my story, my journey. In 2020, Netflix announced an initiative to move $100 million into Black banks, financial institutions, earmarked it around 2% of their cash holdings. And it was an initiative that I conceived of, led, helped to implement, and it was actually born out of a time where corporations didn't really know what to do in this space, right? Like this was right as the pandemic started really taking its hold on the US. Organizations were one, trying to figure out like how to work, but also trying to figure out what to do as the news started to come out that certain communities, certain constituencies were being more negatively impacted by the results of COVID than some other communities. And a lot of that was on racial lines, right? Black and brown communities were faring worse. I had at the time been doing a series of dinners. And the dinner idea in itself was something that was a bit creative, in that my job was running recruitment for all of our corporate functions, finance, legal, HR. And my boss at the time, who ran all of recruitment for Netflix, was like, we need better diversity recruitment strategies. Like simply doing the same old things that everybody else is doing is not yielding the right results. I need all of my leaders to come up with ways that they'll address that in their particular spaces. And I've never been a fan of anything that's really conventional, right? Like, and I think you know that about me, Darrin. It's like, everybody's doing it this way. I'm like, why don't we do it this way? And everybody's like, because everybody's doing it this way. So same thing happens at Netflix, where a lot of my colleagues were focused on, recruiting from HBCUs, connecting with professional networking organizations, sponsorships, things that are, I'd say, more recognized, tried and true diversity recruitment strategies. Nothing wrong with them, but just not something that excited me. And so I presented an idea where we were going to do Jefferson style dinners. And we were going to do Jefferson dinners not to recruit people. So we were going to solve a recruitment problem by not recruiting. Because my theory was, it's not a recruitment issue, it's a network issue. And if you've ever hired anybody, you know that the process usually goes something like this. I've got this problem that I need to solve, or I had a person that left and I need to replace. Based on this problem that I need to solve, I need a job description to describe the thing that I'm trying to do. Who do I know who does that thing? Let me reach out to all my friends and put together some version of the thing that I need based on the people that I know. Now, when you think about my job as a recruiter, I take that job description and I go out into the market and I try to find people who most closely match that thing. Now, if your entire network, let's say in the instance of, and I'll use the CFO one specifically, our CFO, 50-year-old white male, when I sit down and I ask him, hey, Spence, if I were to ask you the top 10 people that could replace you, what would they look like? Who would they be? And he's like, they would all be men. Maybe one would be a person of color and a woman, but that's a strong maybe, right? And what that does in the mind of the hiring manager is it biases you to the possibility that there might be somebody outside of your network that's qualified to do the job, because you built the job based on people in your network. So I'm like, let me hack the network by creating a space for these dinners to happen where you can get to know people in ways that you would not normally get to know people, because you don't get to know people during an interview. You're trying to fill a box. But when that's not the thing, and you're just, chatting over dinner on a topic where you're all equals, you get the real opportunity to know people. And one of my superpowers is facilitation, right? Being able to sit down, listen to the energy in the room, ask the right questions to create the opportunity for everybody to show up as their best authentic self. So we started doing these things, and these things were actually really helping our leaders think more broadly about their networks. The pandemic happens. We're no longer able to have dinner. And working with this firm called Yardstick Management, I'm like, hey, how about we do this thing virtually, or somehow, like, in a way that we can do it while everybody's sheltering at home. We settle on doing these Zoom dinners. During the first Zoom dinner, somebody's like, you know what? It's cool and all that we're worried about, like, changing the complexion and composition of the C-suite, but I'm a banker and I'm trying to make sure that people in, business owners don't lose their businesses because they can't get access to this PPP funding. So I love this conversation, y'all, but I'm a little distracted. And then somebody on the call is like, well, how do we get corporations to move their money into Black banks? Because it seems like a capital problem, not necessarily a competence problem, right? And that person asked the question in this environment that was created for, connection. But I'm like, let me take that idea, press that thing forward, fast forward, I write a proposal, I present it to our CFO on a Friday, May 23rd, May 25th, George Floyd is murdered. I've got this proposal that has nothing to do with George Floyd, that has nothing to do with addressing criminal justice or policing. But in this moment where people are like, something's got to change,
right?
There's this opportunity for Reed Hastings to consider, maybe let's do something else that's completely unrelated, but is connected to the systemic problem. And then June 30th, we make the announcement. So in about a month, we go from an idea and a proposal to executing this thing. And the $100 million that Netflix committed ended up inspiring $2 billion more from across corporate America. And that money is still in these communities today doing work. Like, the amount of money that has been created from that $2 billion alone, because of the money multiplier effect, is profound. And so I'd say that's probably where I finally got to see a lot of these creative sort of energies and tactics come together in a really meaningful way. And for me, what it sort of clarified is like, maybe I'm not supposed to be in HR anymore. Maybe I should be doing something differently, but what? Because I can't describe this thing that I'm doing as a job. There's no job description for this thing. There's no role that I could apply for. And going back to all the stuff I mentioned in terms of like resetting, rethinking, you know, it was like, I'm going to spend more of my time trying to figure out things like this than I'm going to spend trying to figure out how to hire people, because this stuff matters and this stuff can change the world, versus we hired 100 really amazing people. Great for us.
Yeah, but certainly those 100 folks are impacted positively too in the organization.
Of course,
to your point, it's within that space. So I agree. It's great work, and you're impacting probably millions of lives with the $100 million seed, and then followed by billions. Are those were they investments?
They were deposits, and they were either deposits or investments. So the way that this worked, right, because I didn't want to promote something that was philanthropy or a donation, because those things are not sustaining. I sit on a couple of nonprofit boards, and there's so much frustration around the availability of philanthropy capital. This had to be something that didn't go anywhere. And so the cool thing about a deposit is I can take my Scrooge McDuck sized safe full of gold coins and just simply park it somewhere else.
Yeah.
And by doing so, the money that's available now in that community can do the work, because it's not going anywhere. Like Netflix's $100 million is still there. It's just sitting in a different bank. And because it's in that different bank, the lending, and not just 100 million, but that $2 billion is sitting in instruments that allow that money to continue to perpetually, you know, flow through those communities.
Yeah, it's a great way to leverage, that creativity, leverage the money, leverage the funding into the community. I was on a podcast the other day. I don't know if you remember Shamaya Lodge. She was at Mass Mutual in Arizona. We're real tight, and she's working on second chances, fair chances, fair hiring. Folks that are coming out of prison, trying to help skill up, give communication tools, technology. It's amazing work that she's doing. And what she talked about there, not that different. She was talking about, this is all about a hand up, giving a hand up to help people get the opportunity, get the chance to do something with it. It's not a hand out, it's a hand up. And I just love that she mentioned that, and how you described this amazing work and idea that you had. It's the same type of thing, right? The money sitting in these banks, and really giving the opportunity for folks to actually reinvest or keep their money there or present to reinvest in their teams, reinvest in their businesses, keep it alive, especially in these tough times. So I applaud you for bringing that up. And I saw you on a clip too. What was that? CNN? What show was that?
CNBC.
CNBC. Yeah, that was fun to see you out there. It was congratulations. Congrats on everything. I think it's amazing.
No, in the point you raised, right? Like, the thing that I love to be able to tell folks, because now it's going on 4 years. It'll be 4 years in June. And I caught up with the treasurer from Netflix last year, after she had connected with LISC, the Local Initiative Support Corporation. So they're one of the recipients of the funding. I think that Netflix had moved 25 million into them, and they created a $250 million impact investment fund called the Black Economic Development Fund. And as of when I spoke to her last year, every single dollar deployed had come back with interest. So all the loans that they made had come back. All these were good investments, no defaults, no bad actors. And it was so successful that every organization that they were talking to, because the thing that we started with them, I think 20 organizations invested in. All the organizations were like, sign us up for another 3 years, because why not? Like, this was easy. All we did was move our money to a place, and we get a modest return, which is what we knew going in, because the fund was designed to give as much to these small businesses as possible.
Yeah.
They get the modest return, which would have been similar to what they got with a money market bank, but the impact is phenomenal, right? Like going into the restaurants, going into the businesses that are not only have survived the pandemic, but are now thriving and employing people, because in the United States, most businesses are small business, most jobs come from small businesses.
Yeah.
Being able to see that connectivity has been phenomenal.
Yeah, I love your, the connection you bring through everything you do, from the jazz music to the arts to the, making the connections at the dinner. It's just so impressive. And yeah, hey, you've been brought up a certain way to see things, and you've been broken, and you've used that as opportunities to learn, and you persevere, you take action, you work and continue to persevere. I suppose is that I think, and we talk about happiness a little bit.
Mhm.
Happiness isn't just about, like you said earlier, about the titles and the outcomes all the time, and it's really about where you're going and what you said around the journey. It's the actions you're taking and how you're going through this journey. Like how have you been through these times? Have you been able to maintain that level of joy and happiness through this? I mean, sounds like there's been highs and lows, throughout your journey.
There's been many lows. I'd say there's a couple of, I think, things that I think are important. One, I started being vulnerable before it was cool to be so. And I think that vulnerability has, one, allowed me to attract the right kind of people, because you need more positive affirmations than we allow for in this world. And so, like, I've essentially manufactured an amazing fan club of people whose positive affirmations I take to heart. And I reach out to them all the time, not in a like fishing for a compliment kind of way, but in a way where we support each other, right? Like, I was just talking to a friend of mine earlier today, congratulating her on, she just got entered into a film festival, stop motion animation director. And I sent her a text just to congratulate her, tell her how special she is, tell her how special she is to me and how much I love her. And she does the same, right? And it's reciprocal. And I have so many of those friendships because I lead with this, right? Like, I lead with like the brokenness, the pieces that aren't perfect, the things that don't work. And when somebody's like, how are you doing today? If I'm having a bad day, unfortunately, if you ask me, you're going to know. Because in that moment, if you've asked me and you really cared, then you might be just what I need to get over it. So I've always led with that vulnerability, and that's allowed me to cultivate really meaningful friendships, because I need help. Like, I have not done a damn thing by myself, right? And as I tell my stories, like, I'm always telling, and I contacted this person, this and that, and none of it happened because it was me. Like, there's definitely something about having a resilient attitude that's helpful, but I still need help. I still need so-and-so to make that call. I still need so-and-so to make that introduction, because without that, I'm nothing. So the second piece I'd say is just building a strong community and having access, and just being insistent upon doing so. And I've done that every place that I've lived. I do it constantly. Like, and even when I was working as a recruiter professionally, the number of times that the conversations I was having were just for me. I've always done it that way because I've always had the flexibility to do so. It's like, there's gonna be some interviews, but this call, this sort of friendship making thing here, that's for me. I'm gonna take this with me. And I've been able to do that everywhere I've gone. I say the last thing in terms of just sort of maintaining is that I'm honest with myself. When stuff is hard, I'm like, this is hard. When stuff makes me sad, I'm like, this hurts. Like, I was having a conversation with my wife, and I'm like, this thing hurt my feelings, right? Like, I'm a grown man telling my wife that you hurt my feelings, and being able to communicate that, it's like, oh, well, that was not the intent. Here's how we can move forward. And so that, like, that open, honest communication and really like fighting for that thing, that's what's allowed me to, because I've been down more than not in these last few years. I'd say starting in 2020, right? Like, I had a cousin who was murdered by police officers in January of 2020. I was open and honest about that with my team at work. And then when the George Floyd thing happened, like, my boss, we have a staff meeting the next day, and I send an email to my boss like, can we move George Floyd to the top of the agenda, because I cannot jump into this meeting
Hmm.
without sharing like what is heavy on my heart, especially given the fact that like this feels a tinge more personal than just something that happened in Minnesota. And her giving me that space is actually part of what gave me the confidence to then send Reed Hastings the email the next day on this initiative, because every single step of the way, I wasn't going to do it. Every step of the way, I'm like, this can't, this will never happen. This will never happen. Like, and I kept saying that, and I kept looking for reasons to maybe try, maybe do, maybe try, maybe do. And part of that was like being open with people when I'd be like, I'm thinking about this thing, but I don't know. I even sent an email to my section from HBS, 90 people. I'm like, look, y'all, here's this thing that I'm going to try to do. But if it doesn't work, here's the template. Y'all go do it if you think it makes sense, because I don't want my failure to be a failure. And it's funny because even one of my section mates took it to their company. And so maybe a month after Netflix, her company did the same thing. So she was one of the ones that followed. And part of that was because I'm like, y'all take it. Like, I'm not going to try to
Wait.
maintain ownership and authorship of this thing, because it happening is more important than me being able to say I did it.
Absolutely, it's selfless, and there's a level of abundance that you've allowed, you've enabled, you've encouraged other folks to step in with you, and that sense of community is huge. And is that reservoir when we need it, when we need to lean into it, as you said. And I gotta say, I keep hearing the important connection back to communication, back to what you talked about with your parents, and how
Mm-hmm.
your parents would talk about what's going on, in your neighborhood, and what's going on in your life at that time. And it feels like it's coming through with what you're doing. And what I love about how you're doing it with such care. Like, your intentions run deep. You could, like, the fact that you're saying "I love you" and text to colleagues and friends, like, you're openly sharing love. I mean, that's who you're just there. You're playing music for other people with your heart. You could just tell.
Look, man, I mean, I think because of the way that I grew up, I mean, I've lost a lot of people that I love. Part of what I forgot to mention, like when I got to HBS, Harvard Business School, never thought I'd get to a place like Harvard Business School, but I applied because it's like, well, they can tell me no, right? That sort of, the
Mm,
worst thing that could happen is they reject me.
right.
And that's been a very useful attitude. But then I get there and I'm in this space that does not feel like it was created or crafted with me in mind. Because as a Black kid from the inner city who grew up in the sort of the wake of Yale, these places did not feel like they were inviting me in. And then about a month in, 2 months in, another one of my cousins is murdered. I've had 5 cousins murdered um,
Oh my
in
God.
the span of like from 2009 to 2020. And this was the first one, and he was 5 days older than me. I looked up to this dude. He was like the most charismatic, dynamic, beautiful soul. And he gets murdered 2 or 3 months into me being at Harvard Business School. And I remember feeling like I can't even talk about this, because if I say this out loud, people will know that I don't belong here. At the
Mm.
same time, as if I miss this funeral, my family would be like, you done turned your back on who you are and where you're from. And so I just remember being like so conflicted until I was able to say it out loud to somebody that helped me find a pathway through. Like, I was stuck. But like just being able to be honest about who I am and live in my authenticity has been the biggest sort of upside for me in in my journey. But it also means that there's just going to be some places that don't work, that don't accept you, that don't embrace you. And because of the resilience that my parents cultivated, I can take those lumps and keep moving. But does it hurt any less? No, it sucks. Like leaving Netflix and the circumstances I left, because it was like smaller role or severance. Like I cried when it's like, why didn't y'all fight for me? But at the same time, I get it. Like corporations change, perspectives or priorities change. So I can also get over it, move on, and put it in perspective, but it doesn't stop it from hurt. And so I think that you talk about the communication stuff, like having learned, have you ever seen one of those emotion wheels where they have all the words for all the complex emotions?
Yes.
I was
I love
lucky
it.
enough to learn a lot of that stuff, not because I had the wheel in front of me, but because I had parents who helped cultivate that. I learned the language for a lot of that stuff way before learning that stuff was important, and it's allowed me to be super intentional as I communicate with people, because we only live once, at least as far as anybody I know knows,
You're right.
and I don't want to waste this one.
Yeah, your intentionality is so genuine, authentic. It's amazing, and I feel uh, like you're bringing the legacy of others with you. Like you're bringing what you learned, maybe folks that have been unfortunately impacted negatively. I just I wish we could do more. I wish we could go back in time. We can't. We're here, and I appreciate you're bringing it forward. And I'd love to learn more about how are you bringing some of this pain into the work you're doing? How are you bringing some of this forward with you to really help change the world? Because those are some of the dynamics that I've seen on your website. You're looking to help get different perspectives to the table so we can make a better world in front of us.
And I'll keep this one short because it's all work in progress. But one of the things that I do, and I mentioned those dinners. I've been, after leaving Netflix, have continued to do these dinners on a number of different topics. And so part of it is just I want to keep opening up the invitation to have people join, right? Like join these conversations, learn how to be your authentic self, right? And it's hard to do when you don't see models of it, but it's the change that we need, right? Like it's the change that because I feel like we've done so much of this work to try to be people that we're not. And kind of gets beat into you in high school, then in college,
Yeah.
then in workplaces, right? Like in order to be successful, you must blah, blah, blah. And I resisted that accidentally. I didn't know that being my authentic self was going to be the win. I was ready to lose, right? Like I was ready to be the LVP, but because of that, because I didn't have that expectation, allowed me to navigate this path that now I can show others like, hey, you can do your thing your way. Like, because I've never subscribed to the sort of self-made, individualistic, you know, push others aside to get where you need to go mentality. And I was okay with finishing last. And it turns out that I didn't have to, right? Like, so if I can just share this with people and then bring them into the environments, one of those being those dinners. And I put on my LinkedIn page, like, sign up because I'm doing these dinners in every city that I can go to, wherever I'm invited to do so, because there's something about listening to other people's stories that helps to sharpen your empathy. Sharpening your empathy makes it really hard to normalize some of the stuff that we see happening now, the divisiveness, the hatred. You cannot really truly engage in any of that if you have empathy for all human beings and you have sort of a, I'm wearing a shirt that says human, right? Like I'm big on humanity these days. And like I'm not an activist. I'm not a I'm not a humanitarian. I'm just a person, right? Like, and I just want more people to be like, oh, I don't have to be all these labels, and I can just live in this sort of authentic truth. But we need guides, because all the guides we've had thus far are the ones that have told us how to be fake, how to leave more of ourselves at home. So I'm trying to give the stage to more people who can walk and live in their truth. And if that's interesting and exciting, I want people to join. And it's not join me, it's join this community. Because what I don't want to do is be a personality cult. Like I've always I don't know if you noticed, but the only documentaries on Netflix these days are like cult documentaries.
Yes. Yeah, totally.
And I watch these things and I'm like, yuck, I don't want that. Like, don't follow me if following me turns into this. Just listen to this thing that I said, and you don't even need to give me credit for it, because
Mhm.
I don't need anybody following me to a small village in Kazakhstan drinking strange liquids. Like, please don't do that.
Yeah, your story is amazing. I'm up for dinner. Whatever you're in the area, or when I'm out in LA, give you a buzz if you're up for that. Because I'm all in. I'm with you on, hey, is it that hard to treat each other like human beings? And we're all, we're all here. We all have the ability and the right to make a difference, to be happy, to live the life that we want to create. This is why Live Your Possible exists. This is part of why, I wrote my book. I mean, when we met Aaron back in 2017, I was a year into my journey of being vulnerable and trying to understand my authentic self. Like I thought I had everything just right. I thought I was one of the good leaders, one of the good guys, if you will, and I wasn't even good enough. I had that awakening that I had shared with you, and I wasn't looking at differences as possibilities or strengths, or to look at the intersection of two amazing different people and what's possible. And when I started to open my eyes and my heart differently, I started to realize that was who I really was meant to be. Not the leader that had all the answers, that hired the same people like myself. And so, like the stories you talked about earlier, I could totally resonate. And when I started to hire people that were different than me, yeah, amazing, from from where they came from and their experiences and their knowledge and their abilities, we did amazing things, like incredible things, like things I could never even have dreamed of, better than I would have done had I just kind of continued the path that I was on. And so everything you're talking about with authenticity and the ability to be vulnerable, I've been pretty vulnerable too. And I got to tell you, it's pretty amazing what people step into to pick us up when you don't expect it. That's not what I'm looking for when I'm vulnerable. I'm just looking for people to slow down, start to look at ourselves, self-reflect, and see, what can I do differently? Am I doing it the right way? Not to beat ourselves up. You have to ask ourselves, what does it really mean? Like, what am I doing? Am I being that good human that we're talking about?
Right? Like making it clear that you can win being good. Because I think that the unfortunate thing is, like, as a society, we've normalized being mean, nasty, rude, but as long as you win, whatever the proverbial win is, then it's okay. And I believe, similar to what you were sort of alluding to, like the win is in the how.
So, Aaron, we talked a little bit pre-show about happiness and how we could, I guess, have that in our world, even though there's so much divisiveness and there's these high points, there's low points, and you've talked about many of the low points, and you continue to keep going. You continue to take the actions. You continue to try. You keep swinging, even though you said you weren't a good baseball player. Keep swinging. So, I don't know, like how do you do it? Like, how do you stay smiling? How do you stay upbeat? Knowing that, hey, there are times that are tough and there's darkness in other days. Like, how do you maintain that? Like, what do you do?
I'd say, in addition to the stuff I mentioned before, in terms of like the vulnerability, community, and just like trying my best to communicate as clearly and as deeply as possible. One, I've got a therapist, right? And I only started psychotherapy back in 2021. Went my whole life thinking I don't need therapy. Therapy is for those kind of people, right? I didn't realize everybody needs therapy. Everybody needs therapy. I'll say it again, and I'll say it one more time. Everybody needs therapy. And if you think you don't need therapy, you definitely need therapy. But I ended up seeking out a therapist because when I was still at Netflix, it was sort of right after the Black Banking Initiative. And I became sort of internally this expert on racial equity, and like I was helping out the people that were sort of building out supplier diversity and stuff like that, not as a full-time job, but people were now seeking my thoughts and my opinions. And, I'm passionate about these things, and I could feel it wearing on me, in that, like, oh, I'm in this position where people want to know how I might change the world. So it's now my responsibility to change the world. And I remember reaching out to Vernee Myers, who at the time was the chief diversity officer. And I'm like, Vernee, like, how do you do this job without letting it kill you? And she was like, first off, you need a therapist. Get a therapist. Everybody, like everything I just said. There were two books that I picked up on and started digesting. One was Being Nobody, Going Nowhere, which is really about Buddhist teachings. And I'm not Buddhist, but I think there's a lot of wisdom and knowledge in Buddhism that applies to just like finding your own happiness within. And the other one was, I'll find the name of it because I'm not sure why it's escaping me, but between Being Nobody, Going Nowhere, this book, and then the third one being Meditations, Marcus Aurelius, like this idea of Stoicism and Buddhism really made sense at this point, because it's like, oh, wait, if I choose to be happy, then I can be happy. And everything that is in my life that has challenged me is really an opportunity to learn just how much I want to be happy, right? If I commit to this idea of being happy, then I just have to do that thing. I think some people assume once you make that decision, everything just gets easier, right? Like when you choose a certain mindset, that you're just in that mindset. It's every day. Like every day I have to make the conscious decision to sit down. I meditate in the mornings. I wake up around 5 a.m. before my girls and my wife get up so that I can have some peace and quiet. I meditate. I try to think about how I want to be, right? Like with the energy I want to bring to stuff. I have to be very intentional about this stuff because I don't know that that's my natural state. I get frustrated. I get angry. I get mad. I curse, right? Like I'm not somehow exempt from any of these things, but I choose every day, like with my wife, my kids, to embody this sort of joy and happiness. And I don't need a particular outcome in order to stay in that set, right? Like I'm at a point in my life where I'm like, if I accomplish nothing more, I'm still going to be happy every day. My happiness is not contingent upon landing a contract, a certain accolade or a certain promotion or whatever it is. Like I'm so unfocused on those things because all of them just induce suffering, right? But I have to continue to read all these things. Like I reread Being Nobody, Going Nowhere or Meditations often, in the same way anybody who's religious might read the scriptures. And so for me, this is my approach. This doesn't have to be the approach because I think you can find these answers anywhere. You can find them in prayer. You can find them in different religions. This has been the way that I found them. And then I try to leverage my wife and my daughters just as a constant reinforcing mechanism. I need to be this for them because I learned what I know from my parents because we're watching, like the kids are watching when we're not giving lectures, when we're not telling them, they see us. So if they don't see me being the person that I'm trying to encourage them to be, then they won't be those people. And I need desperately for my daughters to know that their happiness is within them. So I'm willing to do all the hard work so that this is just normalized for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I can resonate with that happiness within, and it is a mindset, and it does take work. It isn't some fluffy thing that just happens. It's every day. It is a choice, and I appreciate your story. And what resonated there is that like you said, we could get there a lot of different ways, but it is this place. It's this place where we can have happiness, and it's wherever we are. It's just we don't have to, I didn't take your path. You didn't take my path. I didn't follow Buddhism myself. Yeah, there's some teachings that I totally can relate to, and I have my own backgrounds that I've learned from. So my point is, we all have to go down our own path. It's not on social media. It's within. You got to look within, and it sounds like no kidding. No, it's work. It's
Yeah.
self-reflect, take the actions. A lot of things we've been talking about is taking the actions and the steps. And before we close out, Aaron, I would love to hear a bit about where you're headed, right? We talked in the beginning about redefining prosperity, which I think you just did personally a bit about where you're at. How are you helping others do that? And how can we reach out to you? How can we be part of these amazing dinners?
I'd say the easiest way to sort of connect and understand what I'm doing, how I'm doing it would be I've got my own webpage, aaroncraigmitchell.com. Try to make it as easy as possible. Then my LinkedIn page, which I post quite a bit on a number of different topics like mental health, creativity, equity, leadership, culture. And so that's probably the best way to just kind of see what's going on and what's timely. But more importantly, on my website, I do have a call to action to sign up for the dinners, because these dinners that I'm doing, I've done them on a number of different topics. I've done them on addressing anti-Semitism in the workplace, which, as you can imagine, is an extremely timely and relevant topic. I've been doing this work in anti-Semitism now for almost 2 years. So before it became as daily a topic of discussion for most people. I'm doing conversations on changing the composition and complexion of the C-suite. And I do those on behalf of organizations that are looking to do something similar to what Netflix did. But the sign up is on my webpage. And please, I'd say between following me on LinkedIn, signing up for that webpage, I will find a way to connect with you, because one of the things that I do is I reach out to people and just have conversations, right? Like, and I'm so glad that you reached out to me, Darrin, because like people don't use these tools as much as they should. And you'll be surprised at how many people, when you're like, hey, I just love to talk to you, are like, oh my gosh, I've been waiting to hear from you. Like when you reached out, Darrin, I was like, let me just make sure you're not some AI bot and you're Darrin. Like, why do you want to talk to me, right? Like, and then when you was like, okay, you're Darrin, great, because I've been following you as well, and I've like, at some point, I'd love to do something with you, because even when you started your journey, when we met, I'm like, I like what you're about. I like what you're doing, and I want to see it go from where it is to what it's going to be, because I know that the thing that you're trying to do, which is essentially unlearning a lot of habits that you thought were the right way, is not only a hard thing to do, but it's a beautiful thing to see, right? Just as people start to strip away these notions that like, oh, I thought success was this thing, and now, wait, I can just stop and be successful because I said so? Like, that's powerful. And so in all those ways that I said, follow me, join me, that's the work that I'm trying to do. I also do one-on-one coaching with people, career coaching, leadership coaching, executive coaching. So if embodying some of this stuff as an individual is important, I do help people with that as well. And that's all on my website. But more than anything, I'm just trying to make human connections, because everything that I'd want to do comes from that.
Yeah, you're amazing. And I'm so glad we connected today. And I'm looking forward to continue our friendship and conversation. And yeah, I appreciate you recognizing I wasn't a bot. And you're spot on too. I am unlearning. I think growth mindset is based on the ability to unlearn, to relearn and revisit, what's most important, right? Back to our authentic selves and what really matters. And I have to say, Aaron, I've loved our conversation. I have much love for you, much admiration. I'm honored you're on the show. And again, I look forward to our next conversation. Aaron Craig Mitchell is a super connector with ability to see the potential in people and opportunities where we intersect. Let's highlight some key points from today's show. Open and transparent communication from his parents is leading to caring conversations he is having with everyone he meets, making emotional connections with people and their stories to help redefine prosperity as a way of being, needing to break, become unbreakable. Being a jazz musician helped him be more his authentic self, leveraging and building a community as his reservoir to be there when he falls down, sharing with vulnerability to relate, learn, and grow. We all have the ability to tap into our creativity as we invite in different perspectives at the intersection of different things that make each better. We are both inspired by Franz Johansson's incredible book, The Medici Effect. Happiness is a choice, and within all of us. It is our mindset, and it takes work. We all have the ability to live joyful lives and each have our own path to get there through the ups and downs. Aaron Craig Mitchell is living as possible and evolving as we speak. Seek out what is most important to you and live it. Reconnect with your happy, authentic self like Aaron has shown us, and you too will be living your best life possible. Until next time, make each day count and choose happiness as your way of being.
That's all for today's episode. If you liked the show, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Live Your Possible dares to unlock your fullest potential and become an avenue for others to do the same. Join the community by visiting ignitehappy.com. It's time to discover endless possibilities with equal opportunity for all. See you again next week for more insights on how you can live your possible.